And okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Alexandra Yagubi, and we have with us this evening Dr. Ned Hallowell. For those of you who are not familiar with him or his work, he is arguably the most widely known expert globally on ADHD. He is a graduate of Harvard University, Tulane Medical School. He did a residency at Harvard, is a fellow, received a fellowship in child psychiatry. He has written at least 21 books and sold over 2 million copies. He's also founder of 5 Hallowell centers where they diagnose and treat individuals with ADHD. They're located in 5, there are 5 of them, 2 on the East Coast and 3 on the West Coast. And he still practices and sees patients, himself has ADHD and dyslexia, 3 grown children who also inherited ADHD. So I'd like to thank all of you for joining this evening and for sending in so many brilliant questions. And before we start, I would just like to mention that Dr. Hallowell, let's see if everyone can see it, latest book, ADHD Explained, is phenomenal for anyone that would like to know what it is like to live with ADHD. I would highly, highly recommend this book. It's very straightforward and really describes the experience. So we have some questions we'll start with now. In your latest book, you have said that I treat patients, not textbooks. And I thought that was just fantastic. And this was after discussion of the DSM, which is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual for mental health disorders. So there are a bunch of questions about what is ADHD and when do children start to show symptoms?
Well, I've had, first of all, thank you for the introduction and thank you for welcoming me to your terrific group. I've had moms tell me they could identify it in utero. So,
right. Yes.
So obviously we can't make the official diagnosis in utero, but if a baby is particularly active, you may think, well, maybe he or she has it. And we don't really make the official diagnosis until around age 5. However, if a child is particularly disruptive, hyperactive, impulsive, that can be life-threatening. If you're running out into traffic, if you're sticking your finger in light sockets, if you're wanting to jump out windows. And this was brought home to me very dramatically some years ago. I was out in Seattle talking to a pediatrician, and we were talking just this, how early can you diagnose it? And he said, well, I used to say under the age of 4 until I had a pair of twins in my office, 4-year-old twins. And they were tearing my office apart. And so I sent mom home with some behavioral modification suggestions, how to handle their chaotic behavior. Well, it's a very sad story. Mom called me back. He said a couple of weeks later and said both children had died in a fire they had set when they were playing with matches. And that's what impulsivity can be. I mean, so in someone who is really young, I mean, these are the kids who literally get put on leashes. It sounds cruel, but better than having them run out into the traffic. And truly, there are kids. One of my close friends had one. You can't take your eyes off of them for a second before they're gone. They just have such a powerful urge to run, to explore, and the more forbidden the place is, the more they want to go there. They have no concept of danger. They have no concept of death or anything like that. They just have they want the stimulation, the thrill. So I think you're perfectly justified if it's an extreme situation. There's no medical reason not to do it. It's not like you're playing Russian roulette. There's no dire circumstance. It's just that we generally don't want to stress the cardiovascular system too early. But as long as blood pressure and heart rate remain stable, and there are no EKG changes, and sensorium doesn't change, that just means your state of mind, then you're fine. Now, I don't see many kids that young, so I don't currently have any kids that young on medication. I think the youngest I have is 6, but from a pure medical standpoint, there's no reason not to. The sad part is these meds scare people, including doctors, and so they're loath to prescribe them. And that's really not rooted in good information. If you read about these meds, first of all, they're probably the most extensively researched meds in all of psychiatry. Because we give them to children, and people are obviously very concerned about children. There have been dozens of studies, and they all come up with the same conclusion. Medication is safe as long as it's taken under supervision and properly.
Now,
Now,
you mentioned,
yeah,
oh, I'm sorry, the young child that's very impulsive.
yeah.
And what about, one question that came up was, what about a teenage girl? How would a female and an older female, how would symptoms show, or what would be
Yeah,
indicated?
we're not talking about medication now. You're asking how does the condition appear in a 15-year-old?
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Uh, Females at any age. Now, this is not an absolute, so you can have crossover, but the males tend to be the more aggressive, hyperactive, impulsive. The females tend to be the more daydreamy, lost in their thoughts. So, and that's why they get overlooked, because in school they're not calling attention to themselves. You can't not see the boy disrupting the entire classroom and running on top of the desks, but you can easily not see the girl who's sitting in the back row staring out the window, twisting her hair in her finger. She's very easy to overlook, and that's what typically happens. So the girls tend to be not hyperactive but hypoactive. They're quiet, they're not assertive, they're literally lost in their thoughts. You have to ask them, what is it like to be in the classroom? And they'll say, oh, it's fine, I'm almost never there. Because they're busying themselves in their imagination, which is that's our gift. That's what we have that other people don't, is this huge imagination. And we're always trying to feed it, and it's always generating images, plans, hopes, dreams, plots, schemes. Like I say, we have a Ferrari engine for a brain with bicycle brakes. But that's true in both girls and boys. It's just the boys act it out. Their motor gets them into action, and so they're disruptive. The girls, they just think it out. They just allow the images, to unfold, and they're writing stories in their mind. They're imagining. Instead of a Ferrari with the girl, I say it's more like a butterfly. It's flitting here and there. It's not aggressive, but it can be quite beautiful in what it comes up with. But that's the main, and that's why girls of any age get missed. I mean, the biggest undiagnosed group are adult women. And if you're a woman and you go for help, you'll almost invariably be diagnosed with depression or anxiety and put on meds for that, which is not what you need. So if you have someone in mind or yourself in mind, make sure whatever doctor you go to see that you say, let's consider adult ADD, because most doctors just don't know about it.
And another question we've gotten is, do children outgrow? Is there such a thing of as outgrowing ADHD or becoming less symptomatic, or is it just are they just traits that are part of who you are?
When I was taught about ADHD, I'd never heard of it until I was doing a fellowship in child psychiatry. I'd finished all my training as college, medical school, residency. I was a certified psychiatrist. And the first year of my fellowship in child psychiatry in 1981, I heard about this condition that I had no clue what it was, called attention deficit disorder. It was called ADD then, not ADHD. And my goodness, when I heard the first lecture on that, I thought to myself, there I am. And I also realized that the medical model, the deficit disorder model, left out the good stuff: imagination, creativity, intuition, entrepreneurialism, all of the things that make this condition a wonderful thing to have if you manage it right. But I was taught back then in 1981 that something happens during adolescence and kids grow out of it, that they cease to show symptoms, they cease to want medication, and it's limited. So something happens in adolescence, some hormonal change. Well, that's not true. And what does happen is some people like me learn to compensate so well that it looks as if we don't have it. But if you ask my wife, do I have it? She'll tell you, yes, he does. So it's just a matter of how well you learn to hide it, compensate for it. And that's what used to look as if you're getting over it.
And this brings up another, well, actually a couple of questions. You had said symptoms seem to, you compensated for them. And if memory serves me, in Driven to Distraction, you had said sometimes the testing setup itself can actually cause the symptoms to kind of melt away, where it's, it's new, a novel, one-on-one.
Alexandra, I'm gonna interrupt you before you steal the punchline altogether. I'm very impressed that you remember that. That's an important point, but it's kind of buried in a lot of prose. And you nailed it. Absolutely. The testing situation cures the condition it's trying to diagnose. So it's like taking your temperature with an ice cube on the end of it. And the three factors you were about to enumerate, structure, motivation, and novelty, that they treat ADD. So a good example is the video game. Very structured, full of novelty. There's a natural motivator. You want to win the game. Well, the same is true with psych testing. It's very structured, done one-on-one. Nothing could be more structured than that. It's full of puzzles and games. It's actually fun to take these tests. And there's a natural motivator. You want to beat the test. So particularly in kids with high IQ, they'll look on the test as if they don't have a whiff of ADD. But you put them out on the open prairie and they clearly have it.
And what would you suggest, or what would your recommendations be for providing the most all-encompassing view of a child? As far as if something doesn't show up in the neuropsych evaluation, what other picture, what could provide the best picture of that whole child for, I would say, diagnostical purposes, learning disabilities, that type of thing? In your opinion, what would you recommend to a parent?
Well, it's a wonderful question. And the answer, my answer will be impractical. But ideally, you'd interview everybody who knows that kid at all well. Mm-hmm. So you'd interview teachers, maybe a playmate, maybe grandma, maybe a cousin if they have, and then obviously parents and the child. The child's report is in many ways the least important because these kids are not good self-observers. But if you can get input from a wide range of people who see the kid, know the kid in a wide range of contexts, the diagnosis will be there or it won't be ADD. People think there's a test for it. There's no test. We get testing because it provides additional useful information, but it is not definitive for the reasons we just discussed. You can get false negatives, but the history, that's it. I mean, that's how the condition is defined. It's defined by the presence of, there's 9 symptoms clustered around inattention. Then there's 9 symptoms clustered around impulsivity and hyperactivity. If you have a 6 out of 9 on either axis and it's causing impairment, you've got the diagnosis. It's got to occur in more than one setting, also like at school, at work, at home. But that's how it's defined. So, so if you want to go, you get a report on symptoms, you don't go to a test. You go ask the people, how does this kid behave in a situation where, he doesn't know he's being tested or watched. And that's, if he doesn't show the symptoms, then by definition, he doesn't have it.
Okay.
There's no such thing as covert ADHD.
And for a parent that, let's say their child does not, or supposedly does not have ADHD, but the child does have some processing challenges or learning challenges, how could that parent support the child? Let's say they don't qualify for services. What would your recommendation be about getting support for the child or just helping them in their learning?
Yeah, you mentioned qualify for services. People put way too much faith in these services. Depending upon what school district you're in, public school, private school, it can range from nothing more than glorified babysitting to absolutely brilliant targeted tutoring. There's just a tremendous range of whether it's worth it or not. So you want to pitch your best efforts to what you have some control over, which is what happens outside of school. And so you want to get if it's a math problem, get the best tutor you can find. If it's a self-esteem problem, set him up to get engaged in an activity where he can excel, or she. You can target your interventions so it's not one size fits all. The school itself ought to be a form of therapy. In fact, it is. You go to school, you have to follow instructions, you have to interact with other kids, you have to be exposed to new material, you have to deal with conflict, you have to eat with other people, share bathrooms with other people. There's a lot that happens at school that you have to master socially. So I think every kid is getting what amounts to group therapy simply by going to school. And I think it's overrated to add more into that. And not only that, it breaks the budget of a lot of these schools, and that's why they're notorious for not diagnosing ADHD, because if they diagnose it, then they've got to pay for the treatment, and they don't have the money to do that. So they're caught between two bad outcomes, and I fully understand their position. My solution to that is for parents to target the interventions, control what they can control, and don't get all hot and bothered about what a school can't do. They're not doing it out of malice. They're doing it because the budget isn't big enough. And so, you make the best with what you've got. And I would add that those services are not all that necessary.
And for a child that, an older child, a young adult who is going off to college, you've discussed finding the right difficult and finding your passion.
Alexander, I am so impressed with you. You actually read the book. It's wonderful. I really
And you know what they say, how how those of us with ADHD love positive feedback. So keep it
Yeah,
coming.
yeah,
Just
well,
kidding.
I absolutely mean it. It's
Um,
wonderful as an author to be interviewed by someone who's really read your book and understands it. Yeah, I use the phrase the right difficult because one of our big vulnerabilities is low self-esteem. So the question is, how do you improve self-esteem? Well,
mhm.
the best way is to make progress at some activity that is challenging and matters to you. So I call that your right difficult. It has to matter to you. That's the right part of it. It's in your realm of interest. And it has to be challenging. It has to be difficult, or you'll get bored and walk away from it. And then the key is to make progress at it. So let's say it's skiing. If you want to ski and you've never skied before, you go to a hill, you get an instructor, you learn how to ski. If you don't make any progress, if you just keep falling down, then that's a problem. That breaks your self-esteem. It busts your confidence. So you're playing with fire a little bit when you walk into this model, but life walks you into this model anyway. Uh, but that's why teachers, parents, coaches are so important. If the kid is not making any progress, to give them tips and pointers so they can. But making progress at your right difficult is the phrase I use, is the way to not only build self-esteem, but boost confidence and motivation. And those three elements, those are key. It's sort of like the skeletal system of your emotional makeup: confidence, motivation, self-esteem. There's no anatomical location for any of them, but we all know what they are, and we all know what it feels like to be high or low on any of them. And unfortunately, one of the hard things about having ADD and not having it properly dealt with is your self-esteem sucks. It goes down to the basement. And by the way, these kids are very savvy. They will not accept reassurance. They'll say, "Oh, you're just telling me that, Mom, because you're my mother. I don't believe you for a minute." And so the way to build self-esteem is to prove it to yourself, and you do that by setting the kid up in what I said, the right difficult.
So if a parent is concerned about, their child thriving in college, would you recommend that they, for college success, they find areas that they are interested in, that they are passionate about?
Yeah, if they're in college, I think then you want to have a person. You want to have, because you're not there, and that's the jarring transition of going to college. You go from a situation of maximum structure and supervision, namely living at home, to a situation of virtually no structure and supervision, and it's easy to get lost. And as you don't do well, it's easy to get depressed and disconsolate and sort of giving up. And it's easy to start drinking a lot or smoking a lot of weed or both, because you're feeling lousy, and those are ways to feel better. So I think it's better if for the first year of college, you arrange for your son or daughter to have a coach. And it doesn't have to be a mental health professional at all. To be a graduate student. In fact, that's one way to find one. Put a note on the bulletin board looking for someone to work with my son who has ADD. The only job requirement is you've got to want to do it and be college educated. You
That's a
know,
great idea.
yeah,
That's a
yeah,
great idea.
and a lot of these grad students would love to do it, enjoy doing it, and you don't have to pay them, what you would pay a mental health professional. And they probably will relate better to your kid. A lot of us mental health professionals are pretty stuffy, and college age kids don't exactly take to us unless we're able to loosen up a little bit. So in fact, I have a chapter in one of my books about making the transition to college, and that's basically what I recommend, that you go in aware that this is going to be a jarring transition, and you have safeguards set up. Particularly, you've picked out someone who can be your coach.
Oh, well, that is very, very helpful, I think, for a lot of parents who have children that are going to be going off to
I mean, you
school.
just think about it; it only makes sense. You're sending off this kid who you've had to, remind to come for dinner every day, and you expect him to figure it out himself when he just gets to the college campus. It's not going to happen.
And you just mentioned something that brings me to another group of questions that parents have had about comorbidities. You've written two things that, well, many things, but you mentioned um, uh, that we tend to have a lower mood set point, and there's such a tendency to get in the mind and go in a loop of gloom and doom. So, with regard to comorbidities, before we get into the specific questions that parents have asked as far as anxiety and depression, oppositional defiant disorder, autism, to name a few, um, could you describe for parents? I think this would be super helpful, the TPN and the DMN networks, because knowing, like, having an idea of how things are working in the brain, I think can really help parents understand the crossover with ADHD and the mood struggles that a child might have.
Yeah, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but once again, I'm so impressed you remembered those terms, and most people don't remember them at all. But it's probably the single most important new finding in the book, and it's quite new, within the past 10 years, the discovery by using the sophisticated brain scans called the functional MRI, which is, with the fMRI, as it's called, you can watch the brain as it's doing whatever it's doing.
That's
So
made it
it is. So if
incredible.
you're eating cornflakes, you can watch and see what parts of your brain light up, and if you're watching a movie, or and you can tell when someone gets excited, you can tell when someone's asleep, obviously, you can tell when someone's not interested. And it's allowed us to diagnose thoughts, if you will, diagnose what's going on the screen of your brain, which we've never been able to see in the past, other than self-report. So what are these two acronyms that you mentioned? The brain has a lot of different networks in it, and together each one is called a connectome, and it just means different roads intersecting, and it's like the roads in your neighborhood. Well, when you're doing something, and remember, ADD people, they have a hungry imagination, so they always want to be building, creating, developing. And when you're doing that, let's say you're baking a cake, or you're building a birdhouse, or you're writing a letter, while you're doing that, when you're in the act of creation, 4 different regions light up in your brain, and together they're called the task positive network, the TPN. Now, when you're in the TPN, you're grooving, you're at your best, you are focused, you are creative, you're allowing new input to come up from your unconscious, you're not being interrupted by critical thoughts, your inner critic has quieted for once, and it's you at your best. Well, when the cake is baked, when the letter is written, when whatever it is you're doing is done, the TPN shuts down. And in its place, another connectome rises up, 4 different centers. And together, that's called the default mode network, the DMN. And I call it the demon for the following reason. In those of us with ADD, the DMN has a tendency to send out the most horrific, self-critical messages you could ever imagine. It says worse things to you than you'd say to your worst enemy. You're stupid, you're boring, you're ugly, you have no future, you're a terrible mother, you're a terrible husband, you're a terrible athlete, you're a terrible student, and whatever matters to you, you suck at it. And it just lays it on. Sorry for the siren out there. It lays it on, and it doesn't stop. and you can't argue it down because it is you. You're creating it. So you can't shut it off because you're creating it. And it knows you better than anyone because it's you. So any argument you have, it's got a counter argument. So what people tend to do is they tend to argue with it or drink it out of their system, which doesn't work. It is when people do consider suicide. It is when people do make horrible decisions based on a terrible self-image. It's a dangerous state. So you want to know how to manage it. Well, medication doesn't work. It looks like depression, but it isn't. It's the DMN sending out this negative stuff. Now, why would you attend to that? Well, we people with ADD, we live on stimulation. We've got to have stimulation. Like if I'm talking right now, you out there are not interested, you're not paying attention at all. We just can't deal with lack of stimulation. We bounce off of it. It's called boredom. Boredom is our kryptonite. Well, the DMN is the opposite of boring. Pain grabs your attention, physical pain, obviously, but emotional pain too. And it grabs your attention and doesn't let go. It's very sticky. So to get you out of it, you have to cut it off at the source. And the source is attention. So you have to redirect your attention. Its blood supply, its oxygen supply is your attention. So as hard as it is, because it's got you in its grip, as hard as it is, you've got to redirect your attention, change the channel, drill down on something else. And you want to have sort of a Rolodex of things that work for you, because one doesn't work for everybody. The one that tends to work for most people is very vigorous exercise. You sort of run it out of your system. You can put on really loud music or play an instrument, even better. Something creative, something active that will shut off your attention to the DMN. The worst thing to do is just sit there taking it, because it leaves a mark, and you begin to, what happens is you develop this core of very negative self-image. You develop this, what I call the set point. You picked up on that too. You're amazing. But your set point plummets. And so your idea of regular, ordinary life is I'm a loser and bad things are going to happen and nothing good is going to come my way. So naturally, a hopeful person over the years becomes a pessimist and a depressed, unhappy, hopeless person because of the ravages of the DMN. So it's high stakes poker. You want to engage in helping someone learn how to stop it, because the side effects are very damaging.
And what about with anxiety? Is that similar, Loop?
No, it's. I mean, it's similar in that it's certainly governed by neurotransmitters and networks in the brain, but it's different in what's going on. Almost everyone, period, in life has anxiety. I mean, if you don't have anxiety, we have a word for that. It's called denial. So some anxiety is nature's warning signal. Watch out, someone's breaking into your car. That's why you hear the warning. That's what anxiety is supposed to be. But when it goes beyond that, when the car alarm is going off, even when nobody is touching your car, then you're into the realm of toxic anxiety, and and it also is bad for you. Mm-hmm. So you want to learn how to quell that. I have a 3-step model that does not use medication. Step number 1 is to talk to somebody. Never worry alone. The minute you talk to someone, worry subsides. It's magical. You haven't solved the problem at all. You've just connected with somebody, and you can just feel the misery level goes down and the hope level goes up. So that's step 1. Step 2, once you've connected with someone, get the facts. Toxic worry is almost always rooted in wrong information or lack of information or both. So instead of just letting your mind spin in circles, go out, and if you can't do it alone, you with someone and find out what's the real story. Does that person really hate me? Was my IQ tested at 0? I mean, the kind of stuff that people end up being told and believing. And then number 3, make a plan. And the point here, it doesn't matter if the plan works or not. You can always revise a plan that doesn't work. And that's what life is, revising plans that don't work until you die, because there's no plan that covers that. But when you have a plan, see what happens, the 2 key variables that lead to toxic worry are a diminished feeling of control coupled with an increased feeling of vulnerability. So anything that you can do that will increase your feeling of control and decrease your feeling of vulnerability will reduce toxic worry. And that's what a plan does. Even if the plan doesn't work, it gives you at least the illusion that you have more control and the illusion that you're protected. And that's what you're going for. The absolute reality doesn't matter. A lot of times problems are solved and the external reality doesn't change at all. That's the beauty of having a plan too. So don't worry if your plan doesn't work. Just having a plan is what is required. Those 3 steps, if you can do those, you'll save yourself a lot of Prozac. So never worry alone. Get the facts. Make a plan. And like I say, anxiety occurs in everyone who's got ADD. In part in reaction to the ADD. It's anxiety provoking to walk around and not having any idea what's going to go wrong next. It's like you think you're a walking disaster. What am I going to F up next? And sure enough, you F something up, and then what kicks in is what looks like depression. I'm just a big loser. Well, it's not depression. It's frustration. It's how much more of this can I take? And so instead of diagnosing the person with depression and anxiety, which is symptomatic, and giving medicine for depression and anxiety, which is a Band-Aid, you want to get to the root of it, which is the unacknowledged, undiagnosed, untreated ADD. And then when you treat that, very often the anxiety disappears because you feel more in control, you feel less vulnerable. And the so-called depression disappears because you're achieving at your old high level. So often you are able to treat both so-called depression and anxiety simply by treating the ADD with medication, but also with explaining, like what I'm saying to someone right now would help them if they suffered from this kind of anxiety or this kind of lowered self-esteem. You can take the the insights and put them to use. And just the fact that there is that is reassuring. So I'm not alone staring up at the sky in the empty universe. It's not me versus the void. It's me with these other people who understand me and are my allies, and they're trying to help me, and I'll help them if they're in a jam. And that's what getting through life successfully is all about. It's all about developing connections that are mutually beneficial. And and these days we don't have nearly enough of that. We need to be developing our connections, developing common ground where we know we can have each other's back. And unfortunately, a lot of life in the United States today is all about taking sides and throwing accusations and talking about what's wrong. By the way, you know why we do that so much? Because it sells. Bad news sells.
Sure.
Tragedy sells. With the old line, if it bleeds, it leads. Talking about papers in bygone eras. So you have to know that about yourself, and then intentionally make friends where you admire the other person, you like the other person, you love the other person, and you tell them that. You actually say, I really like you a lot. And why not say that if it's true? And I can promise you, everyone wants to hear that. No one hears that enough. particularly men may pretend, oh, I don't need that, I'm strong. Well, no, you're not. And if you have to pretend that's even less strong. But the power of connection is, I think, the single most powerful force in life that we have. And at its most distilled, we call it love. But as it spreads out, call it connection, attachment, affiliation, bonding, whatever word you want to use. But it comes down to the same thing. It's positive energy between two people or two groups or a whole community. And if you can stoke on that, if you can pump that up, not only do you benefit yourself, you benefit the whole community. I mean, this has been proven, by the way. If you stop, let's say I go to Whole Foods a lot. So let's say I'm at Whole Foods and I'm checking out, and I strike up a conversation with the guy who's checking me out. My conversation with that guy not only makes that guy happy and me happy, it makes everyone else in the store happy. Now, we're talking tiny, tiny, tiny amount. But when one person in a connected group, when their spirits lift, everyone else's do too. Of course, it works the other way. If I was standing there being indifferent, disconnecting, scowling, everyone in the store, their mood would go down a little bit. And we don't realize that we hurt one another or help one another depending upon how well we treat one another. And you know,
It's
we think
contagious.
I'm sorry?
It's all contagious,
Absolutely,
really.
absolutely. And
Mhm.
social science has proven that now. That's not just a a nice saying. It's a fact
True.
that
Right.
and so how you treat other people has a definite impact on how your community is going to feel. And we're not treating each other very well anymore, or we may not be being outright hostile. Sometimes we are, but we're not being outright welcoming either. We all go in, close the door, and watch our TV, or get on our laptop. Which I'm not, by the way, in no way am I a Luddite saying, let's go back to the days of lanterns and candles and reading by the light of the moon. But I am saying one of the really good things we could do for ourselves and for our community is just connect a little bit more. I mean, what I just mentioned, it doesn't come easily to me to make conversation with the guy at the checkout counter, but I do it. And then, once I get into it, I'm enjoying it. So it's one of those things that once you start doing it, you'll like it. And if you can make that a habit, wherever you go, you'll be Johnny Appleseed, spreading apple trees, um, and hopefully what we're doing tonight has an impact on more people than just the people who are listening.
Well, that's you're definitely a step toward away from the culture of disconnection that we've kind of created in this world of um, instant communication, and there's no, we emails keep coming, things keep coming at us, and we just keep going into it. So
Right.
that's great. Another question came in: if there's a relationship between ADHD and hypersensitivity to criticism or perceived criticism.
Yeah, this is Bill Dobson's great contribution. He developed this whole thing and coined the term rejection sensitive dysphoria. And it just means that those of us with ADD often, not always, but often have a way exaggerated response to what we perceive as criticism or rejection or disappointment. Often it's not at all that. I mean, I tell the story at the beginning of my book about worry, where I was giving a lecture, and it was a big, huge amphitheater, and it was very important to me, and I did a really good job. And at the end, I got a standing ovation, and my old teacher, Les Havens, came up and congratulated me and said how good that was. But in the upper left-hand corner of the room, I saw a woman who was scowling. So what do I think about driving home? I think about the woman who was scowling. And you know, when I get home, my wife says, well, how did the talk go? Because she knew I was anxious about it. I said, it was horrible. And she said, well, what do you mean? I said, there was this woman who was scowling. And she was smart enough to say, let's drill down that. How did you know? Well, she was in the upper left-hand corner. And everyone else in the room, oh, they gave me a standing ovation. So then she said the words that have sort of become code between us that are very healing. She said, you're crazy. And I said, thank you. So this is all crazy misperception. I don't have to worry about that woman. No, you don't. And it's crazy that you think you do. But if I can help you by telling you you're crazy, great, you're crazy. That's what we do. We lose perspective altogether. And you know, for all I knew, that woman was scowling because she had a moment of indigestion. But even if she were scowling at me in disapproval, so what? You know, why do I let that you know, upset my apple cart? I mean, you know, things happen that you don't want to have happen. And you know, if I didn't please her, so what? You know, and so it's up to me to toughen my skin a little bit and to go back to the remedy I posed: never worry alone, get the facts, make a plan. And that's what Sue was doing when she was, my wife was doing when she, you know, asked me more specifics about what went so wrong with that lecture.
Mhm.
That's what RSD, rejection sensitive dysphoria, does. You exaggerate, misinterpret, lose perspective, and then begin to torture yourself. And they say, then you're off into the DMN and you're going in cycles and you're perseverating and you're ruminating and you're brooding. And whenever you think of the talk, do you think of the teacher coming up and shaking your hand? No, you think of this grumpy woman in the upper left-hand corner
Sure.
who probably was just having a moment of indigestion. And but you place your entire self-esteem in her hands, and then you let her crush it with one look that probably wasn't even aimed at you. And this is where I encourage people, obviously including myself, to take back control of your moods. Don't allow your crazy tendencies to rule, you know, and use a blunt word like crazy, because that's what it is. You can use something more fancy if you want to, but our emotional self understands blunt much better than fancy. And so when Sue tells me I'm crazy, what that basically is saying, you don't have to believe a word of it because it's nonsense. It's crazy. You know, and so I can put my misinterpretations in the crazy bin, and then develop, plant, repeat the positive bin. And a lot of getting out of that habits of negative thinking come back to that. You can't do it in one lecture. You can't go to Tony Robbins, spend 3 hours getting psyched up, come out of the lecture salivating, you know, ready to take life
Take
on.
on the world.
Yeah, right. Because it dissipates, you know, within a few days. It's certainly within a week, it's gone. The only way you can plant something in your emotional system and make it last is by repeating it. I've started to get my patients to put stickies on their bathroom mirror but they have to write them themselves, so they can't ridicule them. I tell them to put affirmations on the sticky. And so they have to look at it at least twice a day, when they brush their teeth in the morning and when they brush their teeth at night. And it may sound totally hokey, and well, it wouldn't have an impression on me because I'm too sophisticated for that. It would if you actually do it. It has an impression. If you start every day with a little sticky that says you're a good woman, that'll have an impact on you. And if you end every day with another sticky that says you did well today, you did your best, that'll have an impact too, you know. And we almost push it away as if we don't want the good news, as if we're more comfortable in the painful, insecure state, and because that's what we're familiar with. But if you want to change that, it's not medication that's going to do it. It's changing your habits.
This brings me to a lot of another section of questions we have. And you have said pills don't teach skills, which you are giving a lot of tools for dealing with negative thoughts, dealing with anxiety. Um, that said, two things. If there are concerns that a child really is, let's say they have ADHD, they're treated for it, but they really seem very stuck, would you, whether it's depression or anxiety or something else, would you then say at a certain point the parent probably should maybe pursue looking into it, having the child meet with someone uh,
Oh,
if they're really
absolutely,
struggling?
absolutely, absolutely. You can't get enough opinions of the self, so
Mhm.
take advantage of other viewpoints. And there's, believe me, there's no one person who has it all figured out. If that were the case, it would be front page news. It's not. So, we're all making our best guesses. Some of us
Right.
are in a better position to guess because we've had training and a lot of experience, but you want to, listen to your mother-in-law, listen to the dog. The dog can tell you what's going on, so yeah, and the same thing with modes of treatment. I'm a huge fan of medication. I just don't want to have that be the only intervention. And I think these days insight is not being given enough credit.
Well, I found that for myself, sometimes medication has enabled me to become more receptive to the tools and
Exactly.
able to implement the tools.
You're such a smart cookie. Yeah, exactly what it does. It's exactly what it does. It's like it makes you able to receive the rest of the stuff.
So onto the most powerful tools tool that people fear is the medication, stimulant medication. We have some questions, and I know we're running short on time, so I want to get as many of these in as we can. Um, Parents are wondering, let's see, mm, last year you came. I unfortunately missed it, but someone on the panel mentioned that if a child is on medication, I'm assuming this is stimulant medication for a long period of time, that the brain chemistry changes. What I'm wondering is if perhaps it was that it, with implementation of certain tools, more connections are able to be made. Um,
That
if
that that yes, definitely. Then that's sort of what people mean when they say rewiring. You're making new connections and letting go of old connections.
Mhm.
There's a saying in neuroscience that what if you fire together, you wire together. So and so yes, there are new networks coming up, new connectomes, and there are old ones that are falling by the wayside for lack of use. So absolutely. And that's a lot of what we mean by learning a new habit,
Mhm.
developing a new pathway, a new connectome, a new route to get from here to there. So yes, the chemistry is I mean, that's a little bit misleading because people say, well, it changes your brain chemistry. Well, eating changes your brain chemistry, breathing changes your brain chemistry. So it's not such a big deal to change your brain chemistry. Uh, uh, and the kind of changes we're talking about, changes in the concentration of dopamine, for example, around a synapse, that's not permanent. It's not like once you've been on a med that does that for a certain amount of time, then it'll do it without the med. That doesn't happen. We we
Okay.
we don't have we probably will someday. We don't have a transmitter synthesizer that we can implant in your neurons. Like I say, we probably will. Elon Musk will invent it, and we'll benefit from it.
But if that child can build new habits, the habits would likely stay. Is that correct?
Absolutely. See that, and and that, like I said, results from rewiring.
Mhm.
So a new habit has to come from somewhere, and comes from your brain, and it means your brain has learned a new way of doing something, and it's extinguished the old way.
And what
The-
about tolerance? There's
That
some
that you
questions about,
that tolerance just means, a certain dose of the medicine isn't as effective. And
Mhm.
like someone who drinks heavily, uh, a certain amount of alcohol won't make him as drunk as it would make someone else who doesn't drink heavily. And that's tolerance. You need a greater amount of whatever it is to get the desired effect. Uh,
and how is that, does that happen very often with children on medication for a long time, or is it just a
no,
small?
it's more the time you really hear about it is with illicit drugs. But fortunately, with stimulant medication, you do not develop tolerance.
Okay, I think
My
that was the
my daughter
question.
has been on the same dose of Vyvanse for 15 years.
Mhm.
And, so fortunately, you do not develop tolerance. And and this is not in a textbook, I've just seen it happen. If for some reason you go through a period where the medication just isn't working as well as it used to, this happens not infrequently. Most doctors think, okay, we got to bump up the medication. My advice is before you do that, try a couple of days of just stopping it altogether, if you can possibly do that. Stop it completely, and then start it up in a couple of days at the same level. Most of the time, it'll kick back in working the way it used to.
Right.
I don't know why you're giving the brain a rest, you're giving the synapse a chance to recharge. I don't know what it is, but I've just seen it in my practice often enough to be able to recommend it.
And are there any long-term side effects for young children, growing children that have been taking stimulants for a long time? Is there anything that uh,
The only long-term side effect that's been noted is very rare, less than 1% of the time, but you can get a tiny amount of growth suppression in
Mhm.
toto about a half an inch.
Okay.
So if that half an inch matters a lot to you, and if there being a 99% chance that it won't happen, you want that extra 1%, then don't give your kids stimulant medication until they finish growing.
And what does the
Most
research
people come down on the side of I'll take that chance.
um, that makes if it's going to change their sense of self, their ability to function and
Yeah,
success, it might be worth it, right?
I was just talking to someone about this today. We get all caught up in talking about the potential, so the true side effects and the potential side effects of stimulant medication. What you never hear someone talk about is far more important, and that's the side effects of not taking the medication.
Mhm. Right.
Year after year of frustration, underachievement, being bullied and teased and thinking you're stupid. Do that throughout your whole school career, it's very hard to reverse. I can tell you, as someone who treats a lot of adults, low self-esteem is one of the most difficult, once it takes root, one of the most difficult symptoms to correct. It becomes a very, very strongly ingrained habit. You are firmly convinced that you're not a good person.
And with regard to the non-stimulants, supplements, where does what have you seen in research as far as the effectiveness of different types of supplements? That some
It's open season. We haven't proven anything yet, but the best book on it I know is called Non-Drug Treatments for ADHD, and by two professors at Columbia. It's very responsible. It's very it's not pushing anything, but it's not debunking anything either. It's a great book. What supplements do I recommend? I went through a period of time where I got very interested in this, and I tried every supplement I can get my hands on. And there's a lot of them out there, and I wouldn't take them all at once, but I'd take 6 or 9 and see what happened. Well, I finally stopped doing that because what I got was, if nothing else, I had the most expensive urine in Boston. I didn't notice them doing anything, but some people swear by um, uh, fish oil, which is no doubt it's good for you. How good, we don't know. Swear by vitamin B12, vitamin B6. swear by ginkgo biloba, resveratrol. I mean, there's a whole bunch that have their rooting section. And as long as you don't take anything that's actively bad for you, go for it. And you know, and this is a fact that people often overlooked. If you believe it's going to work, you totally increase the chances that it will work. That's the placebo effect, and people make fun of that. No, don't make fun of it. It's your greatest ally. If you believe that this medication is going to get you better, the chances that it will increase dramatically. You know, if you believe that you're going to do well in the upcoming race, your chances of doing well will increase. You know,
And someone just wrote in, what about sleep problems in
as
the
the
medication?
sleep problems are very common,
Mhm.
and stimulant medication can interfere with sleep. So what you want to do is make sure you take it early enough that it doesn't impact your sleep. You still may have unstable sleep. It's one of the big unsolved issues in the world of ADD.
And someone also asked about CBT and ADHD. Is that a treatment for ADHD? Or can it
Well,
be?
it's in that category of supplements. You try it and see. You
Oh,
know.
I think CT, like cognitive
Oh, you
behavioral
weren't, I thought you were talking about the marijuana derivative. You mean cognitive behavioral therapy?
behavioral therapy. Mhm.
Yeah, that's good for everything from athlete's foot to indigestion. I mean, you know, CBT is recommended for everything these days, and it probably does help just about everything. It's really applied common sense.
Mhm.
And it was invented not by the guy who usually gets credit, the guy from Penn, blocking on his name, but the Roman philosopher Epictetus really invented it. And he was the slave who was the happiest guy in the estate. And the owner came to him one day. They said, Epictetus, how is this possible? You're crippled, you're beaten every day, you're a slave, and you're happier than I am. And Epictetus said, well, I'll tell you my secret, but if you'll free me in exchange. He said, free you, I'll give you $1 million or whatever you want. Just tell me. And so Epictetus said, well, master, I control what I can control, which are my thoughts. And then I just let the other go, you know, it sounds a lot easier than it is, but if you can maintain that, just, you know, it's the serenity prayer. That's what it is. And even if you don't master it, it's a good thing to work toward. I mean, I am often plagued by these brooding rumination, and I'm always working toward letting it go, working toward, you know, intercepting it and controlling it to the extent that I'm able to.
And one last question that came through, excuse me, was are there studies that show brains have been rewired?
It depends. Certainly there are studies that show that you get formation of new synapses, and just Google rewiring of the brain and you'll get a ton of articles. And it sounds more glorious than it is. I mean, but it's how, you know, the neuroplasticity is a great discovery, and that just means the brain can change. You know, it used to be thought that when we passed a certain age, you're fixed in position, you can't change. Well, we know now, we've proven that's not true. Just sense should have shown you that that's not true. Someone can go from hating their brother to loving their brother. Someone can go from picking their nose to not picking their nose. Someone can go from drinking heavily to not drinking at all. I mean, you know, you can change in major ways.
And
Not to
that's
say,
exciting, really.
I'm sorry.
That's exciting that
Oh,
the brain,
very.
you know, and I think you had said it's never too late, you know,
Yes,
to get a
exactly.
diagnosis, to make the changes, to that the brain is just still
And on
able
the
to change.
side that people tend never to talk about, it's never too late to fall in love.
Mhm.
You know, it's never too late to fall in love. And, you know, so it's not just changing things like, you know, how much you exercise. It's changing the very foundation of your emotional life.
And I mean, again, your book, you talk about, just love and overall love of activities, of connection, of just life. It's
Yes,
beautiful, just
yes.
really beautiful and powerful.
Thank you so much, Alexander.
I would like to thank you very much for taking the time out of your incredibly busy life to give some support to the Bronxville parent community. And for any questions that were left unanswered, um, I've prepared a list of my favorite books of yours, and as well as ways that parents can follow you. Also, contact information for your Hallowell Center here in New York, and your recommended reading list from ADHD Explained.
Thank
So
you.
we'll send that out to all registrants. So if there are answers that, we don't want to leave anyone hanging. So if there's anything we didn't get to, we will certainly provide a bunch of ways to reach Dr. Hallowell.
Thank you so much. Great to be with you tonight.
Really, thank you so much. This was fantastic.
My pleasure. Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.